Yes, very good. Great, thank you. So, I have all my notes ready there, ready to go. So hello everybody and welcome to this evening's Women Aloud panel about exophonic and translingual writing. So my name is Céline Holmes, for those of you who don't know me, and I will be your host tonight. I'm an avid reader of poetry and fiction. I'm currently working on 2 novels, and I recently had a poem published and a short story published in the Women Aloud anthology North Star. So no, there's nothing wrong with your speakers. That's a real French accent you hear, but then you could probably guess with the theme, tonight's theme. I was born and bred in beautiful Normandy, and I often get asked why I moved to Northern Ireland, and it certainly wasn't for the weather. I had the fanciful notion of marrying a local man, a decision I have regretted ever since. By the way, hello to my sister-in-law that I know is here tonight. So now our panelist. Our first panelist spent many years traveling around Europe before settling in the buzzing metropolis of Ostrava. A poet and filmmaker, she enjoys yoga and meditation in her free time. Not that he has much of it. Let's have a round of applause for Csilla Toldy. So you can just, if you're on mute, you can just, yeah. Our second panelist is a poet and activist named after a Zulu queen, celebrated in her home country as part of Heritage Day on 24th September, which, funnily enough, is also our panelist's birthday. You couldn't make it up. Ladies, please welcome Nandi, Jola. And our third panelist is Belfast-based writer and activist. In her home country, she's an award-winning poet and novelist with an obsessive passion for language. It's not surprising then that she also co-founded 2 activist poetry initiatives in Northern Ireland. Please show your appreciation for Viviana Fiorentino. So I don't know if everyone is muted. It looks like it is because I didn't hear a single sound. So, okay. So now a little bit of introduction before we start our discussion. So what do we all have in common? You probably have an idea. And what do writers Samuel Beckett, Joseph Conrad Nabokov, Kazuo Ishiguro, Yoko Tawada, Karen Blixen, Jhumpa Lahiri, and Elif Shafak, among many others, have in common? The answer is, I lost the line. The answer is that they have all written or they write in a language other than their own, sometimes exclusively, thus abandoning their mother tongue in favor of their new language, like Nabokov. Often they continue to write in both languages, like writer Yoko Tawada, who writes in Japanese and German, or author Elif Shafak, who might be more known to you because she's quite well known in the UK, who uses both English and Turkish. Most will have acquired a new language in adulthood, as a second language, but sometimes as a third or fourth, like Joseph Conrad, who spoke Polish and French before he learned English, or Shafak, who spoke Turkish and Spanish before she learned English. Or sometimes, like Kazuo Ishiguro, they have learned their second language at an early stage when their family settled into a new country. And just like the 4 of us tonight, they all have or had different reasons for leaving that country and choosing to write in another language. Exophony comes from the Greek exo, or ex, meaning out of, and phone, voice. It's a fairly recent term that has been used in academia, mainly to describe German migrant literature or written African literature. Before that, the term that was mostly used was translingual, but there doesn't seem to be a consensual or consensus on the definition. It ranges from everything from referring to words existing in multiple languages, or writers who write in a language other than their own, or writers who write in an adopted language and actively work at creating a new form of language. I've chosen it in addition to exophony because of its multiple meaning, and it can encompass so much, from the idea of writing beyond borders and languages. I think we can make our own definition with that. And it also has the idea of transformation, because writing in another language implies the idea of a shift and a transformation. It also conveys the idea that even if we write in one language, our mother tongue will always hover over us. Its specter whether we want it or not, haunting our writing. And tonight we will discuss our different background and the reasons behind our exophonic and our translingual writing. I will say we're quite different background, and anything to do with the process of writing in another or several languages, what it does to us, belonging. We'll talk as well about belonging and identity and the role of a writer. So our first question tonight to my panelists is, if you could introduce yourself briefly, if you tell us where you come from, what's your mother tongue or your mother tongues, because sometimes there can be more than one. What made you leave your country and what led you to Northern Ireland specifically, and why you write in English or whatever other languages you may write in. So it's quite a lot of questions in just one. So who would like to start answering? Viviana?
Yes, of course. So yes, hello everyone. Thank you so much for inviting me tonight. It's a pleasure to be here. Thanks, Céline. Thanks, Women Aloud NI. So I was born in Italy. So my mother tongue language is Italian. I left Italy when I was 18, and then I came back to Italy, but I definitely left Italy when I was 28. So, and I traveled quite a lot through Europe. So I used to live in Switzerland, Germany, different cities of Germany, actually, England, and then I came in Northern Ireland in end 2013. I think the first shock was when I moved when I was 18, because probably I was pretty young, and yes, I just left my parents' house for the first time, and that was a big jump. And then, yes, I came here for work, and I love this island, I have to say. I'm just loving living here.
Very good, that's great. So what languages do you write in?
I write in Italian and English. I translated German to Italian, and I translate English to Italian. Yes, but I write in Italian and English, both languages. I'm a novelist in Italian, and I write poetry in both languages.
Very good. Thank you very much. Csilla?
Okay, yes, welcome everybody. Hello, and thank you for inviting me and Women Aloud as well. It's wonderful to do this on International Women's Day. So thank you very much for the invitation. My story is first of all, I just want to talk about the languages that I have been exposed to, because I think I was 8 years old when I first started to learn German in Hungary, and just recently discovered how many German words were in our everyday language, and Yiddish words as well. And that's because of the influence through my grandmother. So that was the first language, and then I started learning English when I was about 15, and Russian was compulsory. And then we had, I learned a bit of French and Italian. I did A-level Italian. And then at the age of 18, I decided that I wanted to leave Hungary because I just felt too oppressed, and it was still socialism, and it was probably adventure seeking as well. So I just wanted to see the world and left. And first I lived in France for about 6 months, and after that in Germany for a long time, in German-speaking countries for about 15 years. And while I was there, I started to translate works from German into Hungarian, and I had some published. And I was also writing in Hungarian poetry, which was published in literary magazines, but they were all for dissidents, because in Hungary I couldn't be published because I was a dissident, and there were these very small publications all around the world for emigres, and so I got published in that. And then after a while, when well, personal circumstances changed in Germany, and I started to write scripts actually in Hungarian, and I started to work on films, and then I ended up in London trying to make a film. And by then, of course, I translated from English as well into Hungarian, and I had English, but it wasn't as good as German. Nevertheless, I never felt the inclination to write in German. So I always wrote in Hungarian until I came to the UK. And when I came to the UK, after a while, I started to write in English. And that came about because I just felt that I was rewriting everything what I was translating from Hungarian into English, and I just thought, no, it's better to write in English. But I came to Northern Ireland in '98, which was just straight after the Good Friday Agreement, and that big wave of positivity and hope, and that everybody wanted to change. So that brought us here, and actually yoga, as you mentioned at the beginning. So my husband was asked to, then partner was asked to help to set up a yoga school here.
Oh, very good.
So that's the long story.
Very good. Well, thank you very much, Csilla. And Nandi, so if you can tell us a bit about yourself.
Okay, so I'm Nandi Jola. I'm South African. Unfortunately, I came here in 2001, the decision I regret. For coming here and not being here. I don't regret being here, but how I came here was a love story. I always say it was a trap because no one told me about the weather. So, but I've stayed on 20 years after, and I absolutely love it here. I think for me to understand me, you have to understand the history of the country that I come from, and that intertwined history of today is actually Commonwealth Day. Oh. And what Commonwealth means to us as Africans, it meant that we were under the empire. Therefore, the first language in South Africa is English. So we were actually forbidden from speaking our own language, which is also is my language. And then everything else in South Africa is in English or Afrikaans, because those were the two forces dominant. So I suppose for me, writing is something of salvaging whatever is left, trying, because statistics that is very sad is that Black people cannot trace back to generations. And most of the artifacts were stolen by the British Empire. And for example, so I'm trying to salvage the sense of me as a Black person who grew up under this regime. And most of my belongings are in the British Museum. So most of my history is, for example, is written here in England and Northern Ireland, in the peace wars of Belfast, when Nelson Mandela is a hero. So I have to salvage all the stories to piece together to learn who I am, because I was taught in Bantu education, which meant no prospect of work, not even writing. The only work that was available for a Black person in South Africa was to be a housemaid, a teacher, or a nurse. And I was fortunate enough to be raised by my mother, who was a teacher. So I did have some access to books, even though books, to have books was a crime. So you could be imprisoned to own books, especially if they were radical books or music, which was banned. So it was dangerous times growing up, and the only access I had to free information, free books, libraries, is when I came to Northern Ireland.
Wow. Yeah. And what languages do you write in?
I write in English, but I think in person.
Oh, that's interesting.
Yeah, so my writing is all English, but it's how I process everything. It's in Russian.
Yeah, I don't know if someone was broadcasting there. If you make sure you're all muted, I mean.
Yeah, so that is my process, but I speak 5 languages, but
Wow.
but
you
unfortunately I don't speak any European languages.
Well, but you have other languages that's also something. So you speak English, Gusa, and what other language?
Xhosa, Zulu, Ndebele, and a bit of Afrikaans.
Wow.
But when you're trying to use those languages that are non-European to European, audience, it still doesn't make any, sense. So
Yeah,
English is my only language that I can use in European context.
But yet, all these other languages are also part of you, of who you are and your identity.
Mm-hmm.
And I think we have to learn to listen to the other in their difference and to welcome their identity. I think it's very important that we learn to do that. I think it's something about our humanity as well, that even within a country, we can be all so different. But yeah, I think it's such a richness that you come from a country that a lot of us would never be able to go to because it's quite far away, and you can bring all that culture to us. So, but I thank you very much. So we're going to move on to our discussion now that you all have a bit of an idea of where we all come from and the story behind everything. So I am going to start with mentioning a few men who said a few things about creative writing. And when I first read that, it made my blood boil. And you will understand why. And we'll discuss, and we will not agree with them. It's not really a spoiler. We will not agree with them, but it will be interesting to start with that. So there was a German scholar. He was a theologian and a linguist, a translator called Friedrich Schleiermacher. I'm sorry, I have no German, so I'm sorry if I got the name wrong. So he said at the beginning that was the beginning of the 19th century, every writer can only produce original work in his original tongue, and therefore the question cannot be raised how he would have written his works in another language. Then someone most of you will have heard of as the German composer Richard Wagner. So later in the 19th century said that to make poetry in a foreign tongue has some words I can't say, hitherto been impossible even to geniuses of highest rank. Okay. And then the last one, probably less known, it's a Lithuanian author that lived in America called Costas Ostroskas, who in the 50s wrote an essay. And he said it was impossible to write creatively in an adopted language with naturalness. You could not attain that goal. And he goes on to say that the obstacle, whether linguistic or psychological, are almost insurmountable. So, and I thought it was interesting to note that all these quotes came from men. Well, at least in the 19th century, the men were the ones who were like kind of the master of the writing. Women were not allowed to, they were not supposed to be writers or to be poet or anything. So it's not really surprising. But so obviously we won't agree with that. But I thought, because there's a lot of things, they talk about one language, their mother tongue, as if you could only have one language. And it's interesting to note as well that the monolingualism is quite a modern thing that really started in the 18th century, that before that you had like plural multi-languages everywhere in all the countries. And then, so that's the thing. So I would like to ask you, what do you think of these quotes, and why do you think that they are wrong, and where these guys came from when they said that?
Yeah, can I start?
Yes. Yeah.
I think that there is this because they are all on the continent. That's one reason, I think. And the other reason, I don't know. I mean, for instance, I said that in Hungary we had German, and German was the official language for a long time because it was part of the Austro-Hungarian Empire. So that was a kind of a lineage in people's minds to use that language, and I think kind of people, some people think that they own the language because they were, and like they own that country, that little country which is surrounded by a border, and they don't really realize that borders can move around and they can be surmounted and all of that. But they own the country and where they were born, and they own that language, and that's it. So I think there's some possessiveness in these statements as well.
Yeah, that's quite true. Any thoughts, Viviana or Nandi?
Yes. Well, the first thing that come to my mind about Wagner and company is the sense of a nation, of yes, monolingualism, of course, but also the sense of a just monolithic nation. The same period in Italy, well, Italy was still to be born, and also basically we had different regions, each speaking a different language, because dialects in Italy are different languages. People from the south couldn't understand people from the north, and the other way around. Was really completely different languages. And I have in mind an Italian writer pretty famous and important in Italy is Alessandro Manzoni. He was the same age of Wagner, same period, and he spoke French with the other writers in Italy. So the language for literature was French, for philosophical literal discussions was French, and he spoke a dialect of the region where he was born, and which was pretty close to Latin, to modern Latin. And he wrote in Fiorentino, which was another dialect. So he was writing a language that probably couldn't understand if spoken.
Wow.
So yeah, so that's to give you the dimension of what happens where we haven't a nation.
Yes.
A monolithic nation in the sense of Wagner.
Mm.
So it's also interesting that the other author from US that I don't know, the third one that you mentioned, pointed out the concept of natural. It's said something like it's natural. They cannot write naturally. So
Yes.
there's something like something that we accomplish naturally when we write. And this is interesting, I think, because when we write, I think we need to be kind of under control, having all the words under control. So I think even if it will be true, I think it will be an advantage for a person writing another language, because if you write another language, you have more control on the words you are using. So it should be an advantage there. So it's interesting. Anyway, although I don't agree, it's interesting. It's actually, if you look the same thing from another point of view, you find that actually it can be something that enrich us instead of
yes. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so
yeah, thank you. Nandi, do you have any thoughts on the
yeah, I mean, I just wanted to touch on both Csilla and Viviana's points and bring those then to the context of Africa as a continent. Africa, you know, if you look at the date 1690, that was the date where the conference was held in Europe to divide Africa. So France, England. So they all sat at the table, I think it was in Belgium, and they decided who was going to have which part of Africa. So right up until then, you know, we didn't have borders as Africans. We did have tribes. Mm-hmm. And for example, I'm going to give you is the language Xhosa. It's borrowed from the Khoisan people. And the Khoisan people can be found all over Africa, especially up in the deserts. And those are the people who were moving because of their herds. So wherever the land was fertile, that's where you found them. And so, for example, the cliques or the dialect, those are borrowed languages. And I'm wondering if then, if we put an emphasis on borders and what language is, because we know those things can shift, they can expand, they can, we can also use them against ourselves in terms of writing. But I also wanted to maybe draw a quick parallel or narrative to one of the South African scholars who came to study in England in the 18th century, Mr. T.O. And in his essays, he talks about how he found Scottish people to be similar, especially Irish people to be living in huts like in Africa. So he found himself in villages, and he couldn't make a distinction other than the weather as to how Europe has was in any way different to Africa, for example. But also there was no borders there, because he later became a translator of the Bible to the Xhosa language. So he was instrumental in for example, for England to conquer Africa, because that's the weapon they used, was the Bible. So without that translation of one language to the other, then you ask yourself, how different would have Africa became if we as the people of the Bantu and the Khoisan didn't understand English? Would it have been any different? So sometimes I just want to ponder on that as to what detrimental effect English have on the ear and on the hearts and the minds of Africans.
That's interesting. Lots of history here that I wasn't aware of, and sadly, because we're not taught that in school, or what we're taught is much later, like from the 19th century onwards. And usually when we learn history in school, it's all one bit of that, and it's never chronological. And then when it's chronological, the bits that were missing. But that what you said was very interesting and very saddening as well, the way that the European just imposed their European way of doing things. But what you mentioned about the borders, I think it's very interesting, because with all the reading I've been doing, it seems to be coming like the one language comes from the ideology of one nation state, one language, and one citizenship. So the identity is woven through all of that. So for instance, a French person is French because they live in France, they speak French, and they feel French because we all share the tradition. But this is a bit silly, because we're all different. There are different regions, different accents, different vocabulary, and you go to French Canada, it's different. So they speak French, but they're not French. So it's really, so there is this idea, yes, of this ideology. And I would imagine probably for Wagner and the first one, whose name I can't say, it was very much, it was very much in development of the nation state, and these idea that they were a bit like a poison that they tried to spread everywhere, all around the world, that were quite damaging, I would say. Because and now we're coming back trying to get more like monolingualism, but so many languages have disappeared throughout the time. It's just, yeah. Csilla, did you have any other comments you wanted to add to?
No, I was nodding because I just think about Hungary and how Hungarians cherish their own language, which is fantastic, and I agree, because it's a beautiful language. But at the same time, it's a nationalism is growing in the same way as this love of the language, and spreading Hungarian culture all over the world, and things like these slogans, which perhaps happened during colonialization, what Nandi was mentioning, through the English and the other so-called civilized nations. So yes, language can be politics as well, can mean politics.
Yeah. Sadly, no. So that was one thing of the of the quotes that I wanted to mention, because I think it's quite important to understand as well how the monolingualism and plurilingualism work. But the other thing as well that I wanted to point out from that, if we go beyond that ideology, is the idea that there seems to be that the creativity solely lies in your mother tongue, that you can only be creative in your mother tongue. And then when you talk about the naturalness, is it presupposing that there is a standardized, if it's natural, so everybody should speak the same way? But if you go to England, Ireland, you find there's different accents, different way of speaking, vocabulary vary from one part to the other. And then if you go to Australia, even the English in South Africa or America, the English is different. So what is natural maybe for an English person or an Irish person is not natural for an Australian person. So that's that as well, from one native speaker to the other. But it's the idea is that, yeah, that I think with the saying that you cannot be creative in another language. So I was wondering, what is your take on that? How can we be creative in another language? And is it possible? People were, I saw that in the comment that some people write in other languages, and I know of other people as well who write in other languages. Some people might be hesitating and saying, oh no, I don't have enough of the language, or it's too complicated. But what do you think? How can we be creative when we write in another language? How is it possible that we can become creative?
Well, Agota Christoph was a Hungarian woman who left in 1956, left Hungary in 1956, and she didn't have any French. She went to Switzerland, and after a few years, she was working in a factory, and after 5 or 6 years, she started to study, and she started to write at the same time. And if you read her novels, which were award-winning big novels, the language is extremely simple, but she has something to say. And I think if you have the drive that you have something to say, then you will overcome these obstacles or inhibitions, and you will immerse yourself in the language because you want to communicate with the people who your chosen language. Well, in my case, it's English, and I'm really pleased that it's English. Actually, I write in English, and I don't feel at all that I'm not as creative in English as in Hungarian. But I think it takes time, and you have to really immerse yourself and work with the language. I mean, I started learning English at the age of 15, but I think I'm still learning. And hopefully this will be on forever, because I like learning as well, of course, and discovering.
Yeah, it's an interesting process, learning to write in another language, something I've enjoyed myself very much. Thank you. Nandi, did you have anything to say?
I think it takes time to be creative when you have been subjected to a lot of trauma. So you have to have space where you find yourself within that space, and it has to be a safe space. A quick example I can give, for example, myself and Viviana were working on the same difference projects. And within the same difference projects, we said that we would be keen to hear from people whose first language is not English. Mm-hmm. And therefore, what we have discovered through this process of wanting for people to belong and for them to have their own writing in their languages was that we had to give space for that. We have to allow for people to feel safe, and for that trauma to whatever way. For example, we have examples of people who can't read and write. So how do you want people to be creative then? Yes. So you have to allow for that. You have to say, you do not have to. Viviana and myself will open up all these creative writing workshops with Mary Oliver's poem that you do not have to. You don't have to do this, you don't have to do that, because that allows people then to know that creativity, you know, it's not something that you have to repent for whatever has happened before. You don't have to crawl in the desert on your fours for you to be creative. You can just have a space, whether it's in your kitchen, the bathroom. And also another thing that really works for me in terms of being creative is memory. And when you allow yourself to go there, you know, and you just be in that space of being creative. So the pressure then is not about producing something in English, or somebody who doesn't even speak English but cannot read or write. That's not the whole point of creativity. The creativity is that you feel the space, whether you're walking on the land, whether you are hearing things, but that's creativity as well, to be able to feel safe in the space. Then that's how the process starts. I hope that's answered it.
No, but that's very interesting. Yeah, it's very interesting. And it's also the idea of, people would imagine, if you have difficulties, for instance, when you're learning, so it doesn't have to be English, but any language that is not your own, and it can be difficult to say, oh, you don't know all the vocabulary, you don't know all the grammar, how do you do? But actually, I found myself at the constraint of not knowing. I didn't have a choice. I had to be creative as well in finding ways of expressing myself. And I found as well, because for many years I tried to write a novel in French and I couldn't start it. And as soon as I switched to English, I found I couldn't afford to just think, oh, can I use this word or that or that? I just had to do with what I have. And there is a French group of writers who have set up literary constraint, just for the sake of being creative. And you find that the more constraint you have in your writing, the more creativity that you have as well, because it forces you to think differently. It's like, if you have a problem, you're just instead of just saying, well, I don't know how to solve that, you just try to work it out. And the same with the writing, you just have an obstacle, and instead of just stopping there, you're just saying, how can I go around this obstacle? And I find that writing in English, this has been for me a way of developing my creativity, which is interesting. And it's different ways of expressing creativity. I don't know, Viviana, if you had anything else to add about that, or
Yes, I would love to add something. If I can do a step backwards about what creativity is, or what does it mean, creative writing? Creativity for me has to do with the verb in Italian creare, which means to create. Also poetry, poesia in Italian, comes from the ancient Greek poieo, which is to give born, to create. So for me, poetry, or creativity is to let the life to flow, to let the life to be born. So I think with poetry, with creative writing, poetry or narrative, whatever it is, we try to give a language to something that is mute, that is silence. Like, we want to give a language to glaciers, we want to give a language to flowers, to creatures, other creatures. So I think we need all the languages for do this. So when we try to use a language, what we are doing is try to open up this silence. So each language for me is an opportunity to dance around these vision, things that come to us in the shape of the world, of reality. And what else? Yes, I had in mind while you were talking, Céline, maybe an extreme but very interesting author, Paul Celan. So Paul Celan was an Hebrew. He was a Romanian. He had a French passport. The wife was Christian, was a Catholic, and the mother was a German. So his mother tongue was German, but he used to speak Romanian and French when he escaped and went to France. But at the end, he decided to write in the mother tongue of the mother, that was also the language of the enemies, the people, the murderers of his mother. So he used for creativity the language of the enemies, so to say, the murderers of his mother. And I think because he had a kind of trust in languages, in what is unlost in languages. It's like the last chance, the last island where you get when you haven't anything else. He lost so much, but still he thought maybe in the language there is still something that is unlost. So I think creativity has to do with the unlost, so whatever the language you use.
That's very interesting, thank you. Yeah, there's so much to say about creativity, and I thought it was very interesting to hear all of you talking about that, because it really offers different perspective on creativity, whether that space within us and that space that we have, but also the overcoming. And what you were saying, Viviana, was that the example of that writer. I think it's very, very interesting. So the Japanese author Aruki Murakami, well, he wrote mainly in Japanese, but he apparently has written in English as well a little bit. But he said something interesting, and I think it's more even within your own language. If you want to talk about something new, you have to make up a new kind of language. This is what you were saying as well. It's the idea, it's creating something. If you want to have a language, you know, for the flowers, something, you create that language. And I think that that's also very interesting. Now, moving on, I would be very interested in knowing for each one of you, how much your mother tongue or mother tongues or all the languages that you speak and the countries you've been to and your home country, your culture, how much of that influences your writing today in Northern Ireland?
Can I start? I have been experimenting with different genres. So, for example, I haven't written poetry now in over a year. And when I first started writing, I was writing poetry, and moving into playwriting. I just finished a play for Brassneck. And in that play, there's nothing to do with Xhosa or the country of my birth. It's about my daughter's experience, which I had to write in her voice. So I find myself now asking, questions in my head. What would a 17-year-old born in Northern Ireland say? Or how would they think? How do they belong? How do they? So all now my writing is kind of shifting, which means that in my mentality, I am shifting to write some things that are going to be relevant to the first generation of migrants. And also, it's how they will connect then, not to say that, oh, there were no Black women writers in Northern Ireland, but to have that kind of a template for them. Because I can remember when I first came here and looking for Black writers in libraries and looking everywhere for literature that was relevant to me. And therefore, I think I've dwelled on so much trying to use the borrowed language of English to be understood as a person, as a communicator, as a, but now I'm thinking more about what it is that I want, who it is that I want to write for. And I think that now the onus is on me to write for Black children who are born here, but also would relate because it's somebody that looks maybe like their mothers and fathers. So it's not now a matter of a place that writing is, and it's not even a matter of a language. but it's a matter of an understanding of how geographically this land has changed.
Yes. And it's also a matter of belonging, because by creating that new space, you will create that belonging for the people, maybe that things that you didn't have when you arrived, but now you will have that generation of people who will, thanks to you, will have someone to look to and say, oh, she's like me, she understands me.
I mean, I think the most important thing is to create characters in my writing that the role is for a Black person. And I'm not embarrassed to say that when I'm writing now in the place, I'm looking for a Black actor. There are Black people in Northern Ireland, find one. And, so because I remember when I started looking for acting jobs, there was nothing for a Black person. So I didn't get jobs, didn't get many jobs. So now my job is to write something that is going to have a Black a person there, so that we can't say there's no opportunities for Black people. We create those opportunities.
That's great. Yeah, no, that's really good. Csilla or Viviana, do you have any?
Well, in my writing, actually, my themes are very much rooting in Hungary in my novels, because the first one was a kind of semi-autobiographical about immigrants coming to the UK and how a relationship changed through the immigrant experience. and another one was similarly to Nandi. It was about a second generation immigrant, so a girl who is she was born in Italy, but then she was 3 years old when she came here, and she grew up with an Irish father, and then suddenly it turns out that actually he's not her biological father, and then she goes back to Hungary to find out about her roots and all of that. So she discovers history and her mother's past and all of that. So I think in a way, I somehow feel that I can only write about characters that I know well enough, and they have somehow this Hungarian root or Hungarian aspects to them. But in my poetry, I'm writing. It's almost like I'm thinking in poetry. So I write about everything. And what's interesting is that in a few, not many, but in a few, I also inserted some Hungarian words. So just because of the melody, or just because, for instance, I was writing a poem about my father, and it was so personal that word couldn't have worked in English. So I had to put it in Hungarian. And so then you get the footnotes, but that's how it goes. So yes, I think I'm connected in that way, in that area. I am connected to my language, to my roots.
Yeah, that's something I really relate to as well myself. My first novel, I had to have a French character who had connection with
a big skull, lacuna. So words for a big hole.
There's some broadcasting. Yeah, thank you. So what was I saying?
That you have to have a French character.
Oh yes, I needed to have a character. No, she's not French, but I needed her to have strong connections with France. So she's translating from English to French. She has history in France, and when she's nervous, the thing that calms her down is to recite French verbs. But to me, that was very important to have all that, and I found not less, but at the time when developing stories, I needed to have that connection, and somehow always find ways to have a connection with France, whether probably not as big as if, but it's something I can relate to. I can't just erase that part of me that is French and with my French heritage and culture. It's beyond the words. It's the themes as well. It's who we are as people. Yeah. Viviana, did you have anything to say about that?
Yes, well, for my novels, I mean, I write in Italian, my novels, so I tend to talk about the city where I was born, not even in Italy, the city where I was born. So that little piece of land where I put my feet when I was really a child. So, and I tended to write about my grandmother context, actually. So it is something really that goes back in time, but comes to my mind James Joyce that left Ireland to go to live in Italy and spend all this time in Italy talking about Ireland. So must be something about novels and place where you move that create these.
Yeah, the desire to write about home. Yes, that's true. Yeah.
Still, I think in poetry, it's really different because in my poems, I really try to address what I said before, this what is unlost. So instead of lost in translation, I think that in translation we have lots of unlost, as well as in poetry we have, when you use a language, we try to don't lose the world around us. We try to convey all this in the words. So in my writing, I try to kind of make the experiences that I had all concentrated in the few words that I use in one line. So, and these experiences are all the people that I met, all the places that I went. So it is really the kind of urgency to find a common place for the humanity. So this is why also for me it's very important to talk about nature and the planet in my poems, because I think it's really the world is the place where we are all citizens, and we take care for this place where we all live together, respecting each other. So I think that's really similar to what poetry is. So yes, in my poems, I really try to jump from one place to another one as much as I can.
Oh, that's great. Now, all that we've talked about, all the different things we've talked about, really lead us to the I don't know if it's really an issue, but there's definitely a conflict there about identity, like what you were saying, Viviana, about being here but wanting to write about the place where you were born, and obviously I find that sometimes there's a bit this thing that we have to choose. Am I a French or an Italian writer, or a Hungarian writer, or a South African writer, or am I a Northern Irish writer? And there's all this conflict between all these identities that we have, and sometimes the pressure to choose one, you have to be this. And sometimes I've been told you can't use that because we don't use that kind of word in English poetry. And I'm like, but this is like, because once I use the word poetry and someone said this is lazy, and I'm like, why can I not? Like, one of the greatest French poems is called Freedom, so why can I not use this word? Or sometimes when I was using too many French references, someone was saying your novel is too French, but I am French. So have you found that there's a difficulty, like this conflict in identities, that you found that maybe a pressure, or it doesn't have to be external pressure, it could be yourself trying to, I don't know, trying to be like everyone. I don't know exactly where that could be coming from, but definitely a conflict in all your identities is trying to wonder, who am I anymore? Like, if you, I don't know if you would like to.
Can I just release something and relieve you of something? And this is from again the genius that Viviana is, when she talked in her poem about the sky being too big. And I think we forget something, and I think this pandemic has reminded us, maybe hopefully when we come out of it, we will remember this lesson, how small we are in comparison to how big things are around us.
That's true.
And once we start to realize that how small we are as humans and the vastness of what is going on around us and how much control we have and how little control sometimes we have, then it's the journey becomes an inward journey going outward instead of trying to absorb everything into you. And I think for me that was the transformation that I really got it. Because I was always trying to say I'm going home. You know, every time I'm going to South Africa, I'm going home, but home is not a place, it's a feeling. And also when I get to South Africa, I don't feel like I'm home, and I just want to say, I think I'm going to go back home in Northern Ireland. And therefore I came to this realization that home for me was neither here nor there. And it's a sense then of, it's a feeling. It's a feeling. Is it safety? Is it something that you feel home within your own heart? You are content? Because I was so guilty of one, what have I bloody done? You know, having a child that's born here looks different. What kind of a world am I bringing her into? And all of these things, just connecting her from the roots. But you know, the things, I think I saw a quote today that says the things that we are seeking are within us. And once I got that reassurance that it's everything that we're thinking about is the things that are inside of us, and that's what the writing is. We are just uncovering, and you know, all these things that are in us. That's how I feel anyway. But I think I need to write a novel now.
Yes, definitely. That would be quite interesting. No, but that's true. Yeah, that's kind of a nice thought to, and it's the idea to think that we can be home anywhere and everywhere. And even I heard, I can't remember her name, but she's an Indian-born writer, and now she writes in French. She lives in France, and she says that her homeland is not India and it is not France, but it is a French language. So she has found that place in between where she feels at home. And I thought that it was quite interesting, because I had never thought of that like that. That yeah, it's what you're creating for yourself, actually, that becomes your home, no matter where you are. I don't know what your thoughts are on the matter of identity and belonging, Csilla and Viviana.
Well, I completely agree with Nandi, and actually this is very beautiful that my identity is I'm a writer. So, and then I remember that last year that was the year before, this year is for kind of gone somewhere there. The year before, just 2 years ago, on International Women's Day in the Irish Writers Center, we had a panel, and that was about being a blow-in writer as well. And I was asked whether I am an Irish writer or what kind of writer I am. And then I think I said that I'm not an Irish writer, I'm a Hungarian writer, writing in English. But actually, I really like this idea of exophonic writer, which is a nice other box that you can slide yourself into if you want. But but it's actually a fact that writing in English is liberating for me. Because then I remember we were talking about self-censorship as well.
Yes.
What happened to me when I was translating my work into Hungarian or talking in the radio, and I kind of censored myself because I was back in my childhood, in my 18 years old suppressed socialist system regime, which is kind of coming back now, but but I couldn't. So then when I left Hungary at the age of 18, I kind of cut all the roots, and that person is there in a cocoon, but I'm flying. So I think writing in English or in a different language, for me, it's liberating.
Yeah,
and that's my identity is that I'm a writer, not a Hungarian or an English or whatever. Could be an exophonic maybe.
No, but many exophonic writers have said that writing, so some of them would be in English, but others, like there's an American, I think her name is Jhumpa Lahiri, maybe Viviana, you've heard of her. She writes in Italian. And she said that writing in Italian has freed her completely, freed of all constraint. And also Elif Shafak, who comes from a country where you have a lot of, a lot of censorship as well. And she said that it had freed her from all cultural and psychological constraint. So there is definitely that notion of being freed from some constraint. And some people saying that another language was like a mask, but other people is like the mask, you don't have a mask. So it's really interesting how the people feel, but that's definitely a theme that comes in people's writing. I don't know, Viviana, if you had any thoughts about the identity, or if you wanted to add anything before I move on.
Yes, I really agree with both Nandi, Csilla, and also you, Céline. I love the idea of home as a feeling, as Nandi said. I believe home is again a place of trust. It's a place where we connect as human beings. So I think houses are transitory, but not home. Not home. Home is a larger place. Is a place that we live after us. I mean, it's something that can continue after us, because it's a place where we share things as citizens again. And also in terms of identity, I think we have a kind of prejudice, or so to say, a cliche, that if we leave, for example, a country and we go to live in another country, we are in between these two states. But who is putting the line between two cultures or two languages or two places? We are putting the lines, so we are free to go and back and create a space that hasn't a line. I think it's up to us to create such continuity. And from one side, there's a responsibility as a society to create this freedom of movements, in terms also of practical movements of people across borders. And as persons in our existence, we have the privilege to be a whole person, whatever the borders we go through. I think it's a gift we can get in terms of identity.
Yeah, that's quite true. And it's very interesting, because this is something what you're saying. If you check Elif, if anyone is interested to check Elif Shafak, she has a website and she has lots of articles, and what you were talking about, it's a lot of, you can find as well in her articles. And also she talked, because obviously when she started writing in English in Turkey, they were saying, why are you writing in English? This is a Western language. Are you betraying your country and your culture? And she was saying how sometimes we are pressurized, and whether we speak one language or many languages, it's the same, because we all have multiple identities, even if just within our country, we're a woman, we're a writer, some of us are mothers, some are not. All of that is part of our identities, and we don't have to choose one dominant identity, and we're multiple layered individuals. I like when she said that. And I think it's the same with the exophonic. I don't have to choose being French over being, I'm not Northern Irish, but being a writer in Northern Ireland. I can be in that place, what you're saying, that place in between, where I'm using the culture from, well, both culture from my French culture and the culture from here. And I think this is very interesting. Now I'm aware of the time that is going, and I can see there's a lot of messages in the chat, so people might have some questions, so I want to leave time for that. But just maybe one closing thing as well. Shafak, in her writing, she says as well that storytelling has been hijacked as well by extremists and politicians about what we should be and trying to define us. But she says, as a writer, we have that moral duty to question the mental ghettos that people are trying to trap us in. And I think it's quite an interesting idea. And that writers, and she said writers in general, she's not really specific with the women writers or exophonic, but she says writers also have a duty to build bridges of empathy. And how do you think, as exophonic writers, or writers, translingual writers, or writers of multiple cultures and languages, how do you think we can achieve that in our writing? It's
One, empathy.
Yes, yeah.
Wow. I don't have the answer to that. Is my honest answer. Because you have to look at where we are, the timing of everything. For example, if you lived during the war times, you had to look at how you wanted to be connected to the world. Can I know this is probably the closing remarks before we move on to the questions and answers, but I want to make some very important points for the audience to understand, writers like myself who have not come from the continent of Europe, but from Africa as a non-EU citizen, is that passports are becoming more important than people. So it depends on what passport you have for you to have a value in society. So, for example, if you're holding a European passport, a British passport, then you become one of the greatest writers just by holding a red passport. So that's one thing that we have to remember, is that there are brilliant African writers. Look at Chimamanda Ngozi and how she has to have an American passport to have made it, But we're looking also at Tsitsi, who is now a winner of the Booker Prize, and she's in Zimbabwe, and she cannot move because of the passport. So sometimes you can use the passport citizenship. You can even, you can use also the passport to advance in terms of, it's a political move, a statement. It depends on what you are writing about. Because I know African, for example, Ben Okri, who is a British now, but he's still a Nigerian, and he writes against the British, even though he's holding a British passport. So sometimes it can be a tactical move to come to a place where you want to write about the things that the place has done to you in the past. So going back to writing about trauma, colonization, and all those things. But let's also not forget about the role, for example, of the British Council. They have an office in each and every, country in the world. And what is the agenda then? The agenda is for English to be the dominant language. And so when you look at those things as a writer, then it's how you use all those things to translate into what message you want to give out. So that's, I don't know if I've answered the question, but you're looking at African writers who have come to Europe for the purposes of one, having that citizenship, and for them to be, to be recognized as such and write about those things, because passports are becoming more and more as the borders are closing. Now passports are becoming the thing that we need to open up the borders. Thank you.
Well, I will soon need a passport to go back to France. But it shows this is there's definitely something to be said about that, about how we're instrumentalizing people. And but I don't know, Csilla or Viviana, you have anything you could say about either what Nandi said or the quote I was saying about Elif Shafak? Maybe before we can move on, because it's nearly 10 to 9. So
I just want to say very shortly that for me, as far as empathy goes, and whatever art is that the more vulnerable you make yourself, the more honest you can be in your writing, and that will create empathy. So
yes,
we kind of turn ourselves inside out when we are writing, and make ourselves vulnerable. And I think that's probably the right thing. So that's the thing to do.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you. Viviana, do you have anything else to add?
No, I don't want to add nothing after Nandi, because she beautifully said what I really think is the responsibility of us writers to remember about the passports. Is so important what Nandi said. So not going to add anything else.
Okay, thank you. Now, I can see there's a lot of messages in the chats, and I'm hoping we can. So I don't know if someone maybe wants to.
Yeah, I have some from earlier on in the chat. If you would like me to relay some of them to the panel.
Yes, that would be great. Yes, because I haven't been able to scroll up and down. It's just
no
too
worries.
fast.
Yeah. Rachel asked, when you're writing for yourselves and not to be published, do you choose to write in your mother tongue or in English?
That's an interesting question. Yeah, I'll quickly say that I will write in both languages, because it's probably, for me, it's a language where I will first come to, or I will think first, and there's things that I can express better in French and other things I can express better in English. So maybe depending as well on the mood. So that's an interesting, I know for grief, for instance, I'll tend to write in French first. I don't know for you, ladies, if there's any language that will speak to you first when you just want to write for yourself, or even like diary. Sometimes I can go from English to French in the same sentence. So, yeah.
Well, I use Hungarian as well in my everydays, because all the three children I have, they all speak Hungarian. So, and I enjoy that, but actually I write my diary in English as well, so, which is not for publishing. So, but I like cursing in Hungarian.
Yeah, I was gonna say the same thing. I think Moira knows me very well, because she was my best mentor. And I can say that she must have seen some horrific writing, because I used a lot of I couldn't express how I wanted to say some things in English, even though English is my first language, but the anger sometimes didn't translate. So I use a lot of doodling. I use a lot of dots. I use a lot of like question marks, big question mark. And I must say, it's liberating to curse in class.
Great.
Well, I suppose that kind of leads on to another question that came up in the Teresa asked about the kind of the emotional value of language and words, and whether there was a kind of an emotional weight in words in your mother tongue that didn't translate into English, and or vice versa, I suppose. Is it easy to kind of find the right emotional weight of words?
Sometimes it can be difficult, but it could be also because the themes are so close to our heart. Sometimes you need to have a distance by writing in another language. And sometimes well, at least in French, it's also sometimes you just don't have the word in the other language, so you have to come. There are things that I will find it easier to express in English, just because the vocabulary and the way the wording goes much better with how I think or how I feel. But sometimes it will be French. I don't know how you feel, ladies, when it comes to expressing your emotions, if you prefer to express some emotions in a language and other emotions in another language, or if it depends on your mood, or what will set you maybe to start writing in Italian, Viviana, for instance, rather than English, or the other way around?
Well, in my case, I think really depends the theme I want to talk about instead of the emotions. I mean, for example, if I'm talking of memories, probably the first come in Italian. So, for example, related to the first question about notes, again, my notes are in different languages, but most of my notes about memories are in Italian. Then when I talk of memories that are closer, they can be in German or in English. So it has to do with my experiences. So again, I don't think, well, emotions, not in the writing, probably I would express easier in Italian. I mean, if I talk, but if I'm writing, I think there is a kind of filter that has to do with the time. So, yes.
Thank you.
Leah asked, do you think it's helpful to have a kind of a network of support for checking, you know, your phrasing or words? She talked about an American network that kind of checked for, you know, well, it's interesting to see that Americans need someone to help them with their English, but is the equivalent, you know, do you have people that you go to and say, is this the right way to phrase this? Is this the right word? Is that helpful or a hindrance?
Yeah, I think for me, the word exploitation comes to mind, because I have a daughter that I have exploited. And because her English is brilliant. And even when I'm saying something, she says, you don't say it like that. That's, you know, when she edits my work, to be quite honest, a lot. GCSEs, and now she's doing A-levels. So I find that I have somebody in the house that knows how to put, she does English as well. So it helps me because she's doing English literature. So she knows, and she can reference me to things. So I admit that I have exploited that.
But I think we're all the same. If we have even like my husband, I always ask him, is it the right way? And sometimes say, no, we don't say it like that, or he will cry. I have a lot of problem with prepositions, because sometimes like we'd say in the picture in French, but in English, I think, no, it's the other way around. We say on the picture in French, but in English, I say in the picture. And I always get these mixed up. I also have a writers group, an ALMA writers group. And they're very good at saying, sometimes I mix up the two expressions into one, so I make up my new one. Or sometimes I will use vocabulary that is more English or more American than Northern Irish, because I watch a lot of series and things like that. So it's about sometimes knowing what is really local. And sometimes I just hit it. It's like, I'm not even aware. Someone says, oh, that's very Northern Irish. I was like, oh, I wasn't aware I was being Northern Irish. I just wrote it. So yeah, I don't know for you, Csilla and Viviana, what it is like.
Well, my husband is English, and I made the mistake of giving him a few of my pieces, and then he tore them to pieces. and then he admits that in a way, if he edits it to his standard or whatever, his cultural English, then it loses something from me. Mm-hmm. And I think every editor will have the same problem with our work when they get to edit it. And the last time when I had this short story collection published, my editor came back with many suggestions to change, which some of them I accepted, some of them I was very upset about, and I saw that he was an uncultured man because he didn't understand my nuances. Of course, that was my arrogance, but actually I showed them in I googled the stuff and, and educated the editor. But so yeah, it can happen. It can become, I think it can become difficult with an editor. And then sometimes you just had to put your foot on and say, no, this is how it is. And Viviana, what did you think?
Well, I will say that I don't know. I'm just thinking because I think I had in my experience more editing to do in Italian, especially with the novels, but probably that has to do with the different genres, I mean novels and poetry. And yes, for what's what you were saying also, that Csilla, that what you feel like the text change when it's edited. Yes, it's completely true. So it's also, I mean, I think it's right what you said, that it is important to stick to your own writing. Yeah.
And I think for me it was dangerous to do it with my husband, to be honest. It became I mean, I'm not showing him anything anymore, but because he's just probably it became a kind of, you know, fight.
Oh.
And also a kind of
I think
so I think yeah, it's better to do it with somebody. If you have a feedback group, for instance, people who approach it from a different angle.
I think a lot of the other questions have kind of been answered within the discussion, but if anybody else wants to ask a question, if you put your little yellow hand up, I will unmute you, or you can unmute yourself if you'd like to ask a question at this point. I know Fiona had asked earlier, were there other languages spoken in other than Hungarian? And
yeah, that was one question, specifically to Csilla. I was listening at the very beginning, but I was doing something, so I wasn't able to focus fully. So I was really curious to know, you know, you were talking about Hungarian nationalism, and I suppose I was thinking about, you know, nationalism as in native, as in the people who are born there, and then this claim that there's one language, and then this monolingual kind of monstrosity, which becomes the nation and all of that. And there's always kind of holes in it, you know. So I'm just wondering, in the Hungarian context, you were talking in the Hungarian context, so I was curious about the other languages spoken in Hungary. So I don't know if that's a relevant question at this point.
Oh, no, and actually the Hungarians are famous for for a long time they didn't learn any other languages, so they were very, very, very monolingual, apart from the German, which was forced on them. And I think the other aspect of this is that when a language is compulsory, then people tend not to like it or want to take it on, which happened to me with the Russian. So I studied Russian. I did A-level in Russian and can maybe remember a few words, but not more. Yeah, so and even there is not every dialect is, you can understand it everywhere in the country. So, and it's a small country, but about the same size as Ireland. While when I came to Northern Ireland, and I moved to Warren Point, first of all, it took me about 6 months to understand the people in Ireland or Northern Ireland, after England, London. And the other thing was that just going about 20 miles north in Analong, people speak completely different. And some people, I mean, Analong is famous for its own dialect that nobody can really understand in other parts of Northern Ireland. So this is not, in Hungary, this can't happen. So everybody understands everybody very well, but they are reluctant to learn other languages. They were for a long time. Now it's better probably because of opening the younger generation. They learn English as
I was just curious about the Roma community. I was curious about the Roma community and their languages. And
yeah, the Romas have. I mean, many people understand. I don't understand every word, but many words you would be able to understand. And that seeped over into Hungarian as well, which is interesting. Like the
I
German.
was just going to say that I know that Nandi has to leave shortly, and I just wondered if there was anyone who had a question specifically for Nandi before she has to leave. Any?
I have a question, but it's only if nobody else has one, I can just throw it out.
Yes, Fiona, go ahead.
Yeah, well, I was very interested to I suppose for me, I've always thought of Afrikaans as a European language, that grew up in Africa. So that was really interesting when I heard you say that. But I'm kind of a bit obsessed and very interested in, and anybody who knows me will know, in plurilingualism and the idea of being able to kind of mix languages. And I think my experience of plurilingualism was living in India, and I'm presuming that, with Indebele and Xhosa, and that there's a kind of a plurilingual environment in which you probably grew up, and that ability to kind of begin speaking a sentence in one language and then transfer to another and then throw in a word from a third language, and the joke is only funny if you understand 3 or 4 languages and that kind of thing. So I wondered how for me, that ability to move in a whole range of languages, it's like being in an ocean and being able to swim in a deep way. And did you feel a sense when you found yourself in a place where you might want to talk about something, and then all the different words and the jokes and all of that, and then finding yourself suddenly in a place where everybody's flopping in this small huddle of English, and not being able to kind of move? How did that feel for you?
Well, the joke was always, the joke is that sometimes the joke can turn on you. And the greatest thing about that is that when you assume that no white people can speak Xhosa, and sometimes you get red-faced, when you're, and when you're in the queue and you've got this language, you're talking about this white person in front of you, and they turn around and they answer you in Xhosa. So sometimes, the joke can turn on you. But there's a language in South Africa, which is what we call, or it's a Dal. Dal is language for Afrikaans, which, it's from one region to the next. For example, it's our own language that we created. And I think in Nigeria, they have it as well. They call it Pidgin English. So sometimes we just have these languages that just come out of nowhere, but from the desperation of wanting to talk about others.
Oh.
And then the difficulty is that I have a friend, Nolin, who's born and bred in Belfast, and she speaks Pidgin English because her children are mixed heritage Nigerian, and I can't speak Pidgin English. So when she's with Nigerians, they talk about me. So yeah. So sometimes the joke can be on you as a joker. Thank you, and good night, everyone.
Thank you, Nandi.
I'm off to rehearsals now.
Oh my goodness. Thank you so much for being here today, because I know you had a lot on. So thank you very much.
This is my 4th event, and I have rehearsals now. So good night, everyone.
Bye. Good night.
Thank you, Nandi. Bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. Just wanted to say something. There's actually a word for people moving on from one language to the other, whether when they talk or whether when they write. It's called code switching. It's just the ability of just moving on. And it's something I've observed in people who are bilingual from a young age, they just start a sentence and they immediately and they translate. It's so natural that sometimes for me, even to translate back into French, it takes me a while, because I've been living here for now 10 years and sometimes I just don't remember the right word in French, and sometimes I make up words. But some people have this ability to just move on so smoothly between one language to the other. It's just amazing. But we don't have to be as, you know, like bilingual like that to just, it's just mixing languages, code switching, which is interesting.
Yeah, it happens to us as well.
Yeah, exactly. I don't know if anyone had maybe a last question that I really wanted to ask, and they could maybe yeah, just unmute themselves if they had another question, and we could maybe, or we could just close if no one else has a question.
Yeah. My question is something that I wrote in the chat way back, and it follows on from the last question. Has to do with the use of more than one language in your writing. Now, quite often you read, you know, I've read plenty of books in English where there will be an expression, maybe even a sentence in some language that is strange to me. It's not, you know, one of these sayings like "je ne sais quoi" that we're familiar with, "s'il vous plaît." It's something more exotic. And well, I quite like it, but I know some people don't. And I was wondering, you know, how writers decide which expressions to use and when, and what help they might need in knowing whether they've made it clear enough in the context that readers will get a sense of what they mean, you know.
Well, I guess for me, it depends also where your characters are from. If I'm writing fiction, if I have characters from Northern Ireland, I try to really use, if I can, but I don't always know, but I have other people to guide me as well if I'm making a mistake. But in the novel I'm currently working on, I have, my main character is Australian. And I've been watching Australian stuff on TV to be sure that I get some expressions, and it's things that people can understand if they don't know, because I can understand that with a context so anyone could understand it. But I wouldn't want to make it too local or have too much dialect, because you want also to have a wide readership. You don't want to restrict the people or to think that some people can't understand. So uses of like, I don't know, some very local dialect, whether it would be or obscure, or having too much French, for instance. If I wanted to write something in French, I would avoid doing that so that people would understand. Or having too much, I don't know, if I were to use a lot of Ulster Scots, for instance, not that I'm familiar with it at all, but, and then someone in America not being able to understand that. So it's, I don't know, Csilla and Viviana, if it's something you've come across. I know in fiction anyway, it's something that is more, I would use more like local expressions and things like that, maybe in poetry. But I don't know, Csilla, if it's something that you've had to think about.
Yeah, in one of my novels I had a Rastafari man from the Caribbean, and I was really unsure how to write the dialogue from his mouth. But then I asked people, and they just directed me to readings, which were actually written, novels which were written in dialect, and that so that helped me a bit inform myself about it. But yeah, probably that would be, I mean, you have to do a lot of research if you want to make sure. And I think we talked about this before, that we use the dictionary a lot.
My dictionaries, yeah.
as exophonic writers, and yeah, so that would be my approach, just doing your research and listening to people, overhearing people.
Yeah. Watching TV is a good thing to pick up stuff, I find, if you're watching, because you have all the dialogue, and I find they are very good for putting stuff in, but you have to be careful, because if I watch something set in America and I write here, sometimes people say, oh, this is not an expression. And I say, oh, I heard it. And I realize it's actually an American expression. I want to use it for, so but it's interesting how we pick up even naturally just by listening to other people, observing and watching TV, reading. There's so many different sources we can get.
Somebody wrote in the chat that she's a member of a Facebook group for people who live in America, and they're writing scenes set in Britain. And so they want to know the right expressions to use. You know, because there's quite a lot of differences between British English and American English. And she said they call it Brit picking, which I thought was funny.
Yeah, but I guess, as Csilla was saying, there's a lot of research involved in that. And also, I've been a member of a writers group for 3 years now, and they have been so useful, keeping me right. And my husband as well, and my in-laws, they are really good at helping me with that. So I think it's because of, and research of dictionaries, and yeah, I have lots of different kind of dictionaries. I think every writer should have lots of dictionaries, but when you're an exophonic writer, it's essential. You really just can't do without it. So, and because you love when you love words, it's great to look at words in the dictionary. So anyway, I'm aware of the time, so I don't want to keep people any longer. This is so interesting. I could have talked about this for a long time. So thank you very much, everyone, for being here tonight. I don't know, Csilla or Viviana, if you have one last thought or one last word to tell the audience tonight, or...
Yeah, you were asking about why is women's writing important?
Oh yes, of course, yes, that's right. Women's Day today. It's
Women's Day, and we are in with Women Aloud. And my only word is because we need a voice.
Yes, that is so true. Viviana?
Yes, I co-founded an initiative that is called Le Ortique. It's a bilingual blog in English and Italian. We revoice forgotten women artists. So as well as Csilla said, to give a voice to women means, yes, to have a voice. So we need different voices. Absolutely. Today we posted an article about an Italian woman that was completely forgotten. She's a great poet. She was in a psychiatric hospital for 50 years of her 80 years long life. So she spent most of her life in a hospital, and she was writing very thin pieces of paper, the only paper she had in this hospital, and she was completely forgotten. And now her poetry is coming back. So I think, unfortunately, many women have been silenced many different ways, maybe through a psychiatric hospital, maybe just not considering them, just not publishing them. So we really need a lot of work for discovering these voices that are there to be revoiced.
And it's so important. And on our Facebook page, we had a few videos from people from Women Aloud who answered the questions. And if any of you are interested in knowing a bit more, I have answered the questions myself as well on that. There's so much to be said about women's voice, women being silenced, but also women's voices being stolen, like someone else using their story or what they're saying, and even singing them. There's a case of a French poet who was completely forgotten because it was not acceptable that a woman could be a great poet. But yet you had one of her poems who was sung by a male singer in France at the end of the 20th century. And everyone knows this song, but very few people knew of the poet. And I thought, our voices matter, and we shouldn't let we have to get it to be heard by everyone and not let it being stolen from us. So that's very important. And so I think Rachel has posted the link to the videos, and also just a reminder of the survey. If you could answer the survey, so the link, I will send you an email with the link to the survey if you haven't had a chance to look at it from the chat. So many thanks to all of you.
I was just going to say,
yes.
I would invite people to unmute and give a round of applause to the panel.
That would be great. Yes.
Fantastic evening. Yeah.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Unmute yourselves and
Thank you.
And thanks, Moira, so much for your help and being on, because that's been very helpful, because it's very hard when you're in the middle of a conversation and trying to look at the questions. So it's really, really good. And yeah, thanks, everybody.
Bravo, thank you so much. I had a wonderful time.
Oh, it's great to hear.
Bravo, Csilla, bravo, Viviana, bravo, Céline, and everyone. Bye now.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you, everybody.
It's great to see that we've had people from quite far afield who've been listening to us. So that's really, really great. Yeah, thank you.